The dashcam footage begins grainy. It captures just another routine stop on a lonely stretch of Georgia asphalt. Flashing blue lights reflect off a pristine vintage Mustang. The officer stands confident and arrogant, his hand resting on his holster. The driver steps out, calm as a bomb disposal expert with his hands raised. Officer Vance Hargrove thought he was reeling in a thug. He thought he was the predator. He didn't know he had just handcuffed a ghost, a man with clearance higher than the president's morning brief. Hargrove was about to make the biggest mistake of his life, and by the time the phone rang at the station, it was already too late to stop the avalanche. This isn't just a story about an arrest, it's a story about what happens when a small-town bully kicks a sleeping dragon. The humidity in Oak Haven hung heavy over Route 41, the kind of wet heat that stuck a shirt to a man's back within seconds of stepping outside. Colonel Kendrick Vale adjusted the rearview mirror of his Shelby GT 500. The car was a dark, brooding slate gray, a restoration project that had demanded more patience than he usually reserved for civilian life. Kendrick's skin glowed the color of deep mahogany, his jawline carved from granite. He wore a simple heather gray t-shirt that hugged a chest built by decades of carrying rucksacks and wounded men, and a pair of worn aviators covered eyes that had seen things most men only saw in nightmares. He wasn't in uniform. Today, he was just Kendrick. He was passing through Oak Haven on his way to Fort Benning to meet with General Corbin Drake regarding a classified restructuring of the JASOC, Joint Special Operations Command, training protocols. He was driving under the speed limit. He always did. He had learned long ago that a black man in a car worth more than a house driving through the back roads of the South attracted attention like blood in the water. He saw the Ford Explorer Interceptor sitting in the shadow of a billboard advertising Jesus Saves, but Miller's Ford invests. Kendrick didn't flinch. He checked his speedometer, hands at 10 and 2. He watched the Interceptor pull out, gravel crunching under its tires. No lights yet, just the silent stalk. The cruiser rode his bumper for a distance close enough that Kendrick could see the officer's silhouette, shaved head, sunglasses, chewing gum aggressively. Then the lights flickered on. Blue and red strobes danced across the Shelby's immaculate hood. "Here we go," Kendrick whispered, his voice a low rumble. He didn't feel fear. Fear was a reaction to the unknown. This was a script he had memorized before he even enlisted. He pulled over to the gravel shoulder, killed the engine, and rolled the window down. He placed his large hands on the top of the steering wheel, fingers spread wide. He stared straight ahead. Officer Vance Hargrove stepped out of the cruiser. Hargrove was doughy around the middle with a face that looked permanently sunburned. He had been on the Oak Haven force for some time, a big fish in a pond so small it was barely a puddle. He tapped the rear tail light of the Shelby, a power move, and swaggered up to the window. "License and registration," Hargrove said, not asking, but demanding. He didn't look at Kendrick. He was scanning the interior of the car, looking for a reason. "Good afternoon, officer," Kendrick said, his tone perfectly neutral. "My wallet is in my back right pocket. My registration is in the glove box. I'm going to reach for my wallet first." Hargrove's hand dropped to his holster. The snap of the retention strap echoed in the sudden silence of the road. "I didn't ask for a narration, boy. Just get the ID." Kendrick's jaw tightened just a fraction. Boy. The word hung in the humid air, radioactive. Kendrick moved slowly. He produced his wallet and handed over his driver's license. He didn't hand over his military ID yet. He wanted to see how this played out. Hargrove snatched the license. "Kendrick Vale? You from D.C.? I currently reside in Virginia." "Yes." "Long way from home," Hargrove sneered. "What are you doing in Oak Haven with a car like this?" "Driving through, officer." "Driving through?" Hargrove repeated, mocking him. "See, I clocked you doing over the limit. I was under the limit, officer. I have the cruise control data if you need it." Hargrove leaned in, his breath smelling of stale coffee and wintergreen tobacco. "Are you calling me a liar?" "I'm stating a fact," Kendrick said, turning his head slowly to look Hargrove in the eye. The officer faltered for a microsecond. Kendrick's eyes were terrifyingly calm. There was no panic, no pleading. It was the look of a man who had watched lions feed and didn't blink. "Step out of the car," Hargrove commanded, stepping back and unclipping his radio. "Am I under arrest, officer?" "I said, step out of the car now," Hargrove shouted, his hand gripping the butt of his Glock. Kendrick sighed. He calculated the scenarios. He could disarm Hargrove quickly. He could break the man's wrist, crush his windpipe, and be back on the road before the radio hit the ground. But Kendrick was a soldier, a commander of men. He respected the law even when the law was being worn by a clown. "I am complying," Kendrick said. He opened the door and stepped out, rising to his full height. He towered over Hargrove. Hargrove looked nervous now. The size disparity was evident. He needed to regain control. "Turn around, hands on the roof, spread your legs." Kendrick did as he was told. The hot metal of the roof burned his palms. "Officer, I am an active duty colonel in the United States Army. My military identification is in my wallet. I suggest you look at it." Hargrove laughed, a dry, nervous bark. "Yeah, and I'm the Queen of England. You look like a drug runner to me, Vale." "Nice car, DC plates, attitude. We know the type." Hargrove kicked Kendrick's ankles apart harder than necessary. He patted him down, his hands rough and invasive. He found nothing but a cell phone and a pack of gum. "You're making a mistake," Kendrick said, his voice dropping an octave. "A very expensive mistake. Shut up." Hargrove grabbed Kendrick's wrist and wrenched it behind his back, slapping the cuffs on. The metal bit into the skin. "You're under arrest." "For what?" "Resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, and reckless driving." Hargrove improvised, spinning Kendrick around and shoving him toward the cruiser. As Kendrick was pushed into the cramped back seat of the Ford, he caught his reflection in the window. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. Hargrove slammed the door, shutting out the cicadas. In the front seat, Hargrove radioed in. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. I got one in custody. Black male, non-compliant, bringing him in." Kendrick sat back on the plastic seat, the cuffs digging into his wrists. He closed his eyes and began to breathe rhythmically. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Hargrove had no idea. He had just arrested the commander of the Ghost Walker Task Force. He had just arrested a man who had the direct cell phone number of the Secretary of Defense on speed dial. The clock was ticking. The Oak Haven police station was a relic of the 1970s, a brick block of misery that smelled of floor wax and old fear. Hargrove marched Kendrick through the back entrance, parading his catch past the booking desk. Sergeant Nolan Reed, a fixture of the town, looked up from his paperwork. He was older, tired, with gray stubble and eyes that had seen too many of Hargrove's power trips. "What you got, Vance?" Reed asked, eyeing the giant of a man Hargrove was shoving forward. "Speeder, reckless, gave me lip," Hargrove said, puffing his chest out. "Think he might be moving weight. Car's too nice for a guy like him." Reed looked at Kendrick. He saw the posture. He saw the discipline. He saw the lack of fear. Reed felt a prickle of unease on the back of his neck. "Did you run the plates?" "Not yet. System's slow," Hargrove lied. He hadn't run them because he didn't care. "Uncuff him for processing," Reed said. Hargrove undid the cuffs. Kendrick rubbed his wrists, the skin unbroken but red. He looked at Reed. "Sergeant, my name is Colonel Kendrick Vale. I am requesting permission to make my phone call immediately." Reed paused. "Colonel?" Hargrove scoffed, tossing Kendrick's wallet onto the counter. "Says he's in the Army. Probably stolen valor. Look at him, Sarge. Does he look like a colonel to you?" "He looks like a bouncer." Reed picked up the wallet. He opened it. His eyes widened slightly as he saw the CAC, Common Access Card. It wasn't a standard enlisted ID. It was an officer's card, gold chip, high clearance markings. "Hargrove," Reed started, his voice warning. "Book him," Hargrove insisted. He resisted, pulled away when I tried to cuff him. "I want it on the sheet." Reed looked at Kendrick, then at Hargrove. In Oak Haven, the brotherhood of the badge ran deep, often deeper than common sense. Reed sighed. He put the ID down, print him. They went through the indignity of it. The ink on the fingers, the mugshot. Kendrick stood for the photo, his face a mask of stone. Kendrick Vale, case number 4922A. "Empty your pockets," Hargrove ordered. Kendrick placed his watch, a Breitling emergency worth a high amount, on the counter. Then his phone. "I want my call," Kendrick repeated. "You get your call when we process you." Hargrove sneered. Into the holding cell. They walked him to a cell at the end of the hall. It was a concrete box with a metal bench and a toilet that hadn't been scrubbed in a week. The bars clanged shut with a finality that usually broke men. Kendrick sat on the bench. He didn't pace. He didn't yell. He waited. Time passed. Hargrove walked by drinking a soda, smirking through the bars. "Comfortable, Colonel?" "Officer Hargrove," Kendrick said, his voice carrying through the steel bars like a cold wind. "You have violated Article 9 of the UCMJ regarding the detention of superior officers alongside 4 federal civil rights statutes. Every minute I sit in here is adding a year to the lawsuit and a month to your sentencing." Hargrove laughed, but it was weaker this time. "You ain't in the military right now, boy. You're in Oak Haven, my town." "It's not your town," Kendrick said softly. "It's the United States of America, and you swore an oath you just broke." More time passed. The sun began to set, casting long orange shadows through the high barred windows. Finally, Sergeant Reed walked back to the cell. He looked worried. He unlocked the door. "Come on, you can make your call." Kendrick stood up. He walked to the booking desk. Hargrove was there, feet up on the desk, scrolling on his phone. Reed handed Kendrick the station phone. "Local calls only." Kendrick looked at Reed. "This is a matter of national security. I am dialing a Washington, D.C. area code. If you stop me, you will be named as a co-conspirator in a federal kidnapping case." Reed swallowed hard. He nodded. "Go ahead." Kendrick picked up the receiver. He didn't dial a lawyer. He didn't dial a bail bondsman. He didn't dial his wife. He dialed a number that strictly bypassed the switchboard at the Pentagon. It rang twice. "This is the office of General Corbin Drake, secure line." "This is Sierra Tango 19ER, authentication code Archangel Black. I need to speak to the general now." Hargrove rolled his eyes. "Sierra Tango, give me a break. Who's he calling? Call of Duty support?" On the other end of the line, the tone changed instantly. "Hold one, Colonel." Seconds later, a gruff, booming voice came on the line. "Kendrick, I'm supposed to see you soon. Where the hell are you? I have been unlawfully detained by the Oak Haven Police Department in Georgia. I was arrested without cause, assaulted, and I'm currently being held on fabricated charges of resisting arrest." Silence on the other end. The kind of silence that precedes an airstrike. "Are you injured?" Drake asked, his voice deadly quiet. "Negative, but my timeline is compromised. And, General, they took the Shelby." Drake let out a low curse. "Listen to me, Kendrick. Put the phone down. Do not say another word. I'm contacting the FBI field office in Atlanta and the JAG course. I'm also calling the governor." "Understood, sir." "Kendrick." "Yes, General. Tell them to look out the window soon." Kendrick hung up the phone. He looked at Hargrove, who was looking at him with a mix of confusion and annoyance. "Done snitching?" Hargrove asked. Kendrick sat down on the bench in the booking area, crossing his legs. He checked the wall clock. "Officer Hargrove," Kendrick said, a small, terrifying smile touching his lips. "If I were you, I'd start polishing your resume. You're going to need a new career." Hargrove stood up, his face flushing red. "That's it. Back in the cell now." "No," Kendrick said. He didn't shout. He just said it. "I'm waiting here. My ride is coming." Hargrove reached for his taser. "I said, move." Suddenly, the station phone rang. Reed picked it up. "Oak Haven Police, Sergeant Reed speaking." Reed's face went pale, then it went white, then it went gray. He looked at the phone as if it had turned into a snake. "Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I understand. Yes, Governor. Right away." Reed slammed the phone down. His hands were shaking. He looked at Hargrove. "Put the taser away, Vance." "What? Why?" "This guy is—" I said, "Put it away." Reed screamed, his voice cracking. "That was the governor of Georgia. He said the Secretary of Defense just called him." Hargrove froze. "The who?" Reed looked at Kendrick, who was checking his cuticles. "Unlock the front door, Vance," Reed whispered, "and pray." The silence in the Oak Haven police station was heavier than lead. Sergeant Reed sat behind the desk, his eyes darting between the mute phone and the front door. He looked like a man waiting for a hurricane to tear the roof off his house. Officer Vance Hargrove, however, was pacing. The initial shock of the governor's call had worn off, replaced by a defensive, stubborn anger. He was a man who had never been told no in his entire adult life. "It's a bluff, Sarge," Hargrove muttered, stopping to spit into a styrofoam cup. "The governor, please. This guy probably knows some low-level staffer who pulled a prank. Nobody calls the governor for a speeding ticket." Kendrick Vale remained seated on the metal bench. He hadn't moved a muscle in some time. He watched Hargrove with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a rat in a maze. "You really don't get it, do you?" Kendrick asked quietly. Hargrove spun around, his finger jabbing the air. "I told you to shut your mouth. You think you're special? You think because you got a shiny ID card you can speed in my town? I don't care who you called. When the chief gets here, he's going to back me up. We stick together here. The chief isn't going to be your problem," Kendrick said. "And who is?" Hargrove stepped closer, invading Kendrick's personal space again. "Let me tell you how this goes, Colonel. We impound that fancy Mustang. We scan it for residue. Maybe we find something, maybe we don't. But under civil asset forfeiture, if I suspect that car was used in the commission of a crime, say drug trafficking, which fits the profile, we keep it. The department auctions it off. Maybe I buy it, drive it to work." Kendrick's eyes narrowed slightly. There it was, the motive. It wasn't just racism. It was theft wrapped in a badge. So that's the racket. You pull over out-of-state plates, high-value vehicles, intimidate the drivers, and steal their property. "It's the law," Hargrove smirked. Suddenly, the coffee mug on Sergeant Reed's desk began to vibrate. It was a low hum at first, a subtle trembling of the liquid surface. Then, the windows of the station rattled. The hum grew into a roar, a rhythmic thump, thump, thump that resonated in the chest cavity. "What is that?" Reed stood up, walking to the window. "Probably a storm." Hargrove dismissed, though he looked uneasy. "That's not a storm," Kendrick said, standing up. "That's a Sikorsky UH-60 Blackhawk. 2 of them by the sound of the rotor pitch." Reed peered through the blinds and gasped, stumbling back. "Vance. Oh, God. Vance." Hargrove rushed to the window. Outside, the sleepy town of Oak Haven had turned into a war zone. 2 black helicopters were hovering low over the police station parking lot. Their wash kicked up clouds of dust and debris, whipping the American flag on the pole into a frenzy. But it wasn't just the air support. Route 41 was blocked. A convoy of 3 black Chevrolet Suburbans with government plates screeched to a halt in front of the station, boxing in Hargrove's cruiser. Behind them, an olive-drab Humvee with EMP military police markings mounted the curb, crushing the station's flower bed. Men in tactical gear poured out of the Suburbans. They weren't wearing local police uniforms. They wore windbreakers that said FBI and DOD, Department of Defense, in bold yellow letters. "Lock the door," Hargrove screamed, panic finally piercing his thick skull. "Reed, lock the door. Are you insane?" Reed shouted back. "I'm not locking out the feds." The front door of the station didn't just open. It was thrown open with enough force to crack the plaster on the wall. 4 men entered. The point man was a towering figure in a suit holding an assault rifle at the low ready, scanning the room. Behind him walked a man in an army dress uniform with 2 stars on his shoulder, Major General Corbin Drake. Flanking him were 2 FBI agents in crisp suits. The station was suddenly very small, room clear. The tactical officer shouted. General Drake spotted Kendrick. He ignored the police officers completely and walked straight to the holding area. He looked at Kendrick's handcuffed wrists. Hargrove had recuffed him earlier just to be petty. Drake turned slowly to face Hargrove and Reed. The general was older with hair like steel wool and a face that looked like it had been chiseled out of a mountainside. "Who is the officer in charge?" Drake barked. The volume was moderate, but the authority was absolute. Reed raised a trembling hand. "Chief Briggs is on his way. I'm Sergeant Reed." "Sergeant Reed," Drake said. "I am Major General Corbin Drake, Joint Special Operations Command. This is Special Agent Rowan Pierce of the FBI. You are currently holding a high-level strategic asset of the United States government. You have seconds to explain why Colonel Vale is in cuffs before I have this entire building condemned and every one of you arrested for treason." Hargrove stepped forward. His arrogance was battling his survival instinct, and the arrogance was winning. "Now wait a minute. You can't just barge in here. I'm Officer Hargrove. I arrested this suspect for resisting arrest and reckless driving. Jurisdiction belongs to Oak Haven PD." Special Agent Rowan Pierce, a sharp-featured man with wire-rimmed glasses, stepped forward. He held up a piece of paper. "Officer Hargrove, we've been hearing a lot about you." Hargrove blinked. "What?" "Unlock the colonel," Drake ordered. "Now." Hargrove hesitated. "I have to process the unlock him." Reed screamed at Hargrove, rushing over to grab the keys himself. Reed fumbled with the lock, his hands shaking so badly he dropped the keys twice. Finally, the cuffs clicked open. Kendrick rubbed his wrists. He looked at Drake. "Good to see you, General. Apologies for the delay." "Not your fault, Kendrick," Drake said, his eyes softening slightly before hardening again as he looked at Hargrove. "Did they harm you? Minor assault during the arrest? Threats of false imprisonment?" And Kendrick turned his gaze to Hargrove, whose face was rapidly draining of color. "Officer Hargrove informed me of his intent to seize my vehicle under false pretenses for personal gain." The room went deadly silent. Special Agent Pierce let out a low whistle. "Civil asset forfeiture fraud." Well, well, the chief of police, a portly man named Warren Briggs, finally burst through the door, tucking his shirt in. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw the military police guarding the lobby and the general standing in the booking area. "What in God's name is going on?" Briggs stammered. "Chief Briggs," Pierce said smoothly, "I'm Agent Rowan Pierce, FBI Public Corruption Unit. We're taking jurisdiction of this station effective immediately." "You can't do that." Briggs blustered. "This is a municipal matter. It became a federal matter when your officer kidnapped a Special Forces commander." Pierce replied, "But actually, Chief, we've been watching Oak Haven." Hargrove's jaw dropped. Pierce walked over to Hargrove's desk and picked up a stack of files. "We've had reports of a racket on Route 41. Luxury cars with out-of-state plates getting stopped for speeding. The drivers are intimidated, arrested on trumped-up charges, and their cars are seized. The cars are then auctioned off. Interestingly, most of these cars are bought by a shell company registered to a Derek Hargrove. Your brother, right, Vance?" Hargrove backed up until he hit the file cabinet. That's a coincidence. We have the bank records, Vance," Pierce said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "We just needed a trigger event to move in. We needed you to bite off more than you could chew. And today, you didn't just bite off more. You swallowed a grenade." Kendrick stepped forward. He wasn't the prisoner anymore. He was the accuser. "Officer Hargrove, when you pulled me over, you didn't check my speed. You checked my paint job. You saw Shelby and you saw a payout. You saw a black man driving it and assumed I wouldn't have the resources to fight you. You assumed I was a criminal because it made your paperwork easier." Hargrove looked at Chief Briggs for help, but Briggs was staring at the floor, realizing his own career was incinerating. I thought he had drugs," Hargrove yelled, desperate. "I smelled marijuana." "That's probable cause." "You smelled nothing," Kendrick said calmly. "I don't smoke and my car smells like leather and high-octane fuel." "Check the car," Hargrove screamed, pointing to the door. "Bring the dog. If there's drugs, the arrest stands. Doesn't matter who he is." General Drake laughed, a dry, harsh sound. "You want to search the colonel's car? Go ahead, MP." Two military police soldiers stepped forward. "Escort Officer Hargrove to the Colonel's vehicle," Drake ordered. "Let him search it. In fact, film it." They dragged Hargrove out to the parking lot. The sun was setting, casting a blood-red light over the scene. The Shelby GT500 was parked where the tow truck had dropped it, ironically right next to the FBI SUVs. Hargrove was sweating profusely. He knew there were no drugs, but he was a man who knew how to plant evidence. He reached into his pocket, his fingers brushing a small baggie of cocaine he kept for emergencies. He approached the car. An MP stood away, an assault rifle across his chest. An FBI agent held a video camera. "Open it," Hargrove demanded. Kendrick threw him the keys. Hargrove opened the passenger door. He leaned in, pretending to look under the seat. His hand moved toward his pocket. "Don't do it, Vance," a voice said from the car's speakers. Hargrove froze. The voice was coming from the dashboard. "The vehicle is equipped with internal surveillance," Kendrick said, standing by the hood. 3 interior cameras with audio uploading to a cloud server in real time. If your hand leaves that pocket with anything other than air, you're adding manufacturing evidence to your list of felonies. Hargrove's hand shook. He slowly pulled it out empty. He looked under the seat. Nothing. He opened the glove box. Nothing but the registration and a folded American flag. He stood up, defeated. The lie had collapsed. "Find anything, officer?" Pierce asked, leaning against the hood of the Shelby. Hargrove shook his head, looking down at his boots. "Good," Pierce said, "because we found something in your cruiser." Back inside the station, the atmosphere had shifted from tension to a tribunal. Agent Pierce placed a laptop on the booking desk. "While you were outside pretending to be a cop, my team executed a warrant on your patrol car and your locker." On the screen, a video played. It was body cam footage from Hargrove's own camera, footage he thought he had deleted. "Technically, you did hit delete," Pierce explained. "But Oak Haven PD uses a cheap server backup that retains deleted files. You really should read the manual, Vance." The video showed a stop from some time ago, a young college student. Hargrove was seen taking a wad of cash from the kid's wallet and putting it in his own vest pocket before handing the empty wallet back. "That's theft," Pierce said. Another video. Hargrove planting a baggie in the back seat of a Honda Civic. "That's planting evidence," Pierce added. Then Pierce pulled up a document. "And this is the real kicker." He turned the laptop so Chief Briggs could see. "This is an email exchange between Officer Hargrove and his brother regarding the auction of a BMW some time ago. Make sure the bid stays low. I scratched the door so nobody else wants it. Bid rigging." Hargrove stood in the middle of the room, stripped of his power, stripped of his bluster. He looked small. General Drake stepped forward. He looked at Kendrick. "Colonel, how do you want to handle this? We can take him into federal custody now, or we can let the locals handle the paperwork under our supervision." Kendrick looked at Hargrove. He walked up to him, close enough to see the sweat dripping off Hargrove's nose. "You called me boy," Kendrick said softly. Hargrove flinched. "You disrespected the uniform. You violated the Constitution. You preyed on people you thought were weak." Kendrick's voice was like gravel grinding together. "I've fought men who wanted to kill me for my flag. I've fought men who wanted to kill me for my religion. But men like you're the worst kind of enemy because you hide behind the very laws you break." Kendrick turned to Pierce. "I want him booked here in his own station by his own sergeant." Sergeant Reed looked up, startled. "Sergeant Reed," Kendrick said, "you're a good man who stayed silent too long. Redeem yourself. Read him his rights." Reed stood up. He looked at Hargrove, the bully who had made the precinct a toxic hellhole for years. Reed took the handcuffs, the same pair Hargrove had used on Kendrick, from the desk. "Vance Hargrove," Reed said, his voice gaining strength. "Turn around. Sarge, come on." Hargrove pleaded, tears forming in his eyes. "Don't do this. Turn around," Reed barked. Hargrove slowly turned. The click of the cuffs was loud in the silent room. "You have the right to remain silent," Reed recited. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As Hargrove was led toward the holding cell, the same dirty, smelly cell he had thrown Kendrick into, Kendrick stopped him. "One more thing," Kendrick said. Hargrove looked back, broken. "My car," Kendrick said. "You scratched the door when you leaned on it earlier. You're paying for that." The door to the cell clanged shut. General Drake clapped Kendrick on the shoulder. "Hell of a detour, Kendrick." "Just a training exercise, General." Kendrick smiled tiredly. "But I think I'm going to be late for that meeting at Fort Benning." "I think we can reschedule," Drake said. "But we aren't done yet." "Pierce." "Yes, General." The chief knew. Drake said, pointing a finger at Chief Briggs, who was trying to sneak into his office. "He signed off on the auctions. Take him too." As the FBI agents moved on, the chief and the chaos of justice finally cleaned out the rot in Oak Haven, Kendrick walked out the front door. The air outside was still hot, but it felt cleaner. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving a purple bruise on the sky. Kendrick walked to his Shelby. He ran his hand along the fender. He got in. The engine roared to life with a ferocious growl that shook the pavement. He didn't speed as he pulled away. He drove exactly the speed limit, but the story didn't end there. Because when a man like Kendrick Vale pulls a thread, the whole sweater unravels. And Hargrove wasn't just a bad apple. He was part of a poisoned orchard, and Kendrick had just ordered the bulldozer. The arrest of Vance Hargrove and Chief Briggs was not the end. It was merely the opening salvo of a war Oak Haven was ill-equipped to fight. News of the incident didn't just spread, it detonated. The Dashcam footage recovered by Agent Pierce's team from the secure cloud server before the local IT department could accidentally wipe it was leaked to a major network affiliate in Atlanta. The image of Colonel Kendrick Vale, tall, dignified, and calm, standing handcuffed next to his Shelby GT500 while Hargrove smirked at the camera, was plastered across every screen in America. But the real drama was unfolding inside the federal courthouse in Atlanta sometime later. The courtroom was packed to capacity. The air conditioning struggled to combat the stifling body heat of reporters, families of previous victims, and uniformed military personnel who had come to show solidarity with Colonel Vale. Kendrick sat in the front row wearing his Class A dress uniform. His chest was heavy with ribbons, the Silver Star, the Bronze Star with Valor, the Purple Heart. He looked less like a victim and more like a monument carved from obsidian. In the defendant's chair, Vance Hargrove looked like a ghost of his former self. The orange jail jumpsuit hung off his frame 2 sizes too big. His head was shaved, revealing a pale, bumpy scalp that flushed pink under the fluorescent lights. He wouldn't make eye contact with the jury, and he certainly wouldn't look at Kendrick. The prosecutor, a relentless U.S. attorney named Brooke Caldwell, paced before the jury like a shark in shallow water. "Ladies and gentlemen," Caldwell began, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, "this case is not about a speeding ticket. It is not about a clerical error. It is about a predator, a man who used the badge of a police officer not to serve and protect, but to hunt and collect." She clicked a remote, projecting a slide onto the large screen. It was a complex spreadsheet. "This is the Hargrove ledger," she explained, pointing to the columns of data recovered from a hidden encrypted drive in the defendant's home computer. It lists numerous vehicles seized over a period. Notice the pattern. Most were driven by minorities, most were out-of-state drivers, and all of the auctions were attended by only 3 bidders. All shell companies linked to the defendant's brother, Derek Hargrove. The jury whispered among themselves, glancing from the screen to the small trembling man at the defense table. Then came the testimony. One by one, Hargrove's victims took the stand, a parade of broken lives. There was Jamal Hayes, a young black architect from Charlotte. He told me if I didn't sign the title of my BMW M3 over to the department, he'd plant cocaine in my baby's car seat. I signed it. I was terrified. It was my dream car. There was Sophia Ramirez, a traveling nurse. He took cash from my purse. He said it was drug proceeds. It was for my mother's chemotherapy copay. He just put it in his pocket and laughed. Hargrove's defense attorney, a court-appointed lawyer who looked like he hadn't slept, tried to paint Hargrove as a stressed officer doing a tough job in a drug corridor. He followed procedure, the lawyer argued weakly. He had instincts. Sometimes instincts are wrong, but that doesn't make them criminal. When it was Kendrick's turn to take the stand, the room went so silent you could hear the hum of the lights. "Colonel Vale," Caldwell asked, leaning on the podium, "you are a Special Forces commander. You are trained in hand-to-hand combat, disarmament, and neutralization of threats. Why didn't you resist? You could have physically stopped him." Kendrick leaned into the microphone. His voice was a low rumble, calm and controlled. "Because, ma'am, I swore an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That oath means respecting the law, even when the law is being mocked by the man wearing it. If I had fought him physically, I would have become what he wanted me to be, a violent stereotype. By waiting, by using the discipline the Army taught me, I exposed him for what he is." "And what is that, Colonel?" Kendrick turned his head slowly. He looked directly at Hargrove, his eyes boring into the ex-cop's soul. "A coward with a gun." The verdict came back guilty on all counts. Deprivation of rights under color of law, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, extortion, perjury. The judge, a stern woman named Justice Hawley, who had no patience for corruption, looked over her glasses at Hargrove during sentencing. "Mr. Hargrove, you have disgraced your uniform. You have terrorized innocent people. You treated the Constitution of the United States like a doormat to wipe your boots on. You seem fond of seizing things, cars, money, freedom. Today the court is seizing your life." She banged the gavel with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. "I sentence you to federal prison without the possibility of parole." Hargrove's legs gave out. He had to be held up by the marshals. He looked back at the gallery searching for his brother, but Derek was already in handcuffs, having been indicted for the auction fraud. The Hargrove family business was permanently closed. As the marshals dragged Hargrove away, he passed close to Kendrick. He stopped, his boots scuffing the floor. "I didn't know," Hargrove whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't know who you were." Kendrick stood up, buttoning his dress jacket with deliberate slowness. "That's the problem, Hargrove. You shouldn't have to know who I am to treat me like a human being. Prison is a hard place for anyone. For a dirty cop, it is a special kind of hell." Vance Hargrove was processed into a high-security federal penitentiary known for housing high-risk inmates. He arrived in shackles, stripped of his uniform, his name replaced by a number. Because of his former profession, Hargrove couldn't be placed in the general population. The Aryan Brotherhood, the Latin Kings, the gangster disciples, they all had members inside who would have killed him for sport or simply for the clout of taking out a cop. So the warden placed him in administrative segregation, ad seg. To the outside world, it sounds safer. In reality, it is a psychological tomb. Hargrove spent most of the day in a concrete box. The walls were painted a dull, maddening shade of cream designed to pacify aggressive behavior, but it only induced paranoia. The air smelled of industrial disinfectant and unwashed bodies. His window was a slit of reinforced glass that looked out onto a brick wall. There was no swagger here, no gum-chewing arrogance, no thumbs hooked in a duty belt. The early period broke him. He paced the cell until his feet blistered. He screamed at the guards demanding to see his lawyer, demanding to speak to the warden, citing codes and statutes that no longer applied to him. "I'm an officer," he yelled through the steel door, his voice cracking. "You can't keep me in here. I have rights. I know the law." A guard, a massive man named Officer Cruz who had seen men like Hargrove come and go, slid the food slot open. He didn't look Hargrove in the eye. "You ain't an officer. You're a convict, and you're in here because you thought rights were optional for everyone else. Eat your loaf." The tray clattered onto the floor. It was neutral loaf, a tasteless brick of blended vegetables and grains served to unruly inmates. Hargrove stared at it, the realization finally sinking in. He wasn't the hunter anymore. He was the lowest thing in the food chain. But the hard karma Kendrick had predicted wasn't just about the confinement. It was about the systematic dismantling of Hargrove's existence outside the walls. While Hargrove rotted, the world outside was scrubbing him away. The Department of Justice, led by Agent Pierce's team, didn't stop with the conviction. They initiated a pattern or practice investigation into the entire Oak Haven Police Department. It was a forensic autopsy of corruption. They found the ghost accounts. Chief Briggs and Hargrove had been skimming from the municipal budget using the auction proceeds to pad their salaries. The DOJ froze every asset Hargrove had. His bank accounts were seized. His pension, the golden parachute he had counted on, was revoked under the moral turpitude clause of his contract. His wife, struggling under the shame and the sudden freezing of their assets, filed for divorce into his sentence. She didn't visit. She didn't call. She sent a process server. Hargrove received the papers during his recreation standing alone in a wire cage in the yard under the blistering Florida sun. He read them with trembling hands. She was selling the house. She was taking the kids. She was moving to Oregon and legally changing their last name to her maiden name. "I can't let them grow up with your name, Vance," her letter read. "The kids get bullied at school. They show them the video of you on the news. They call them little thieves. You didn't just ruin your life, you ruined ours." Hargrove fell to his knees on the concrete, gripping the chain-link fence, sobbing until his throat was raw. He had done it all for money, for status, for power, and now he was bankrupt, powerless, and alone. But the hardest blow, the one that truly shattered his spirit, came later. Hargrove had earned trustee status, allowing him to work in the prison library during hours when the general population was on lockdown. It was his only escape from the cell. He spent his time organizing tattered paperbacks and old magazines, trying to forget who he was. One day, he was sorting a stack of donated magazines when he saw it. The latest issue of Time magazine. The cover was striking. It featured Colonel Kendrick Vale in full combat gear standing on the tarmac at Fort Benning. Behind him was a Black Hawk helicopter. He looked regal, unshakable, the epitome of everything Hargrove wasn't. The headline read, "The Quiet Warrior: How One Soldier's Patience Toppled a Corrupt Empire." Hargrove's hands shook uncontrollably as he picked it up. He opened the magazine, his eyes frantically scanning the article. It detailed the arrest. It quoted the judge calling Hargrove a disgrace to the badge. It interviewed Hargrove's victims, Jamal Hayes and Sophia Ramirez, who spoke about how they were finally rebuilding their lives thanks to the restitution funds. And then Hargrove turned to another page. There was a sidebar article titled, "The Shelby Rides Again." The photo showed the slate-gray Shelby GT 500. It was gleaming under the lights of a high-end auction house in Atlanta, looking more beautiful than ever. But standing next to it wasn't a rich collector. It was Kendrick Vale shaking hands with the director of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. The caption read, "Colonel Vale auctions his prized restoration car for a substantial amount." In a stunning move, Vale donated all of the proceeds to establish the Oak Haven Legal Defense Initiative, a nonprofit dedicated to providing free legal representation for victims of police misconduct and civil asset forfeiture. Hargrove stopped breathing. The air left his lungs in a painful rush. He read the quote from Kendrick below the picture. "A car is just a machine," Vale said. "It's metal and rubber. But justice is the engine that keeps this country running. If selling this car prevents another officer like Hargrove from destroying a family, then it's the best drive I ever had." Hargrove dropped the magazine. It hit the linoleum floor with a slap that echoed in the silent library. He stared at the glossy photo of the car he had coveted, the car he had been willing to destroy a man's life to steal. The irony crushed him like a physical weight. The very object of his greed had been turned into a weapon against people like him. The money he tried to steal was now being used to hunt down corrupt cops. Every dollar that car brought in would pay for a lawyer to put a man like Hargrove in prison. He had created his own destroyer. Hargrove slid down the bookshelf, burying his face in his hands. The silence of the prison library was suddenly deafening. filled only by the sound of a grown man weeping. He wasn't crying because he was sorry. He was crying because he finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. He had kicked a stone thinking it was a pebble and brought a mountain down on his own head. Later, Colonel Kendrick Vale sat on the porch of his home in rural Virginia. The sun was setting, casting a golden fire-like light over the Blue Ridge Mountains. The air smelled of pine needles and rain. He wasn't driving a Shelby anymore. In the driveway sat a sensible, sturdy Ford F-150. He didn't need the flash. He never did. The Shelby had served its purpose. It had been the bait for a trap that caught a monster. His phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from General Drake. Job's done. Briggs took a plea deal today. The Oak Haven PD reform bill just passed the state Senate. You changed the law, son. Kendrick smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. He took a sip of iced tea. He thought about that day on the roadside. The heat, the humidity, the anger that had tried to rise up in his throat. He thought about Hargrove. He didn't feel hate for the man anymore. Hate took energy, and Kendrick had better things to do. He just felt a distant, cold pity. He stood up and walked to the edge of the porch. His wife, Nadia, came out the screen door and wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head on his shoulder. "You okay?" she asked softly. "I'm good," Kendrick said, resting his large hand on hers. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how fast life changes," he said, watching a hawk circle the thermals above the tree line. "One minute you're just driving down the road, the next you're at a crossroads. And you took the right turn," she said. "We took the right turn," he corrected. Kendrick looked out at the winding country road leading away from his house. It was clear. No flashing lights, no speed traps, just the open road waiting for him. He had won, not because he fought with fists, but because he stood still when the world tried to move him. He was the rock, and Hargrove was the wave that broke itself against him. Wow, talk about karma hitting back with the force of a freight train. Officer Hargrove thought he was the predator, but he ended up being the prey in his own trap. He lost his badge, his freedom, and his family, all because he judged a book by its cover. And that book happened to be a war hero who wrote the manual on discipline. It's a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about how loud you can yell or how fast you can pull a gun. True strength is composure. It's knowing who you are when the world tries to tell you otherwise. Colonel Vale didn't just beat a corrupt cop. He dismantled a corrupt system without throwing a single punch. And that final twist, selling the car to fund the defense of other victims, that is the ultimate mic drop. If this story got your heart racing, make sure to smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow and tells us you want more stories like this. And if you want more tales where justice is served ice cold, hit subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. What would you have done in Colonel Vale's shoes? Would you have kept your cool, or would you have fought back? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and remember, be careful who you mess with. You never know who's behind the wheel.